welcome to our podcast celebrating AAPI Heritage Month. I am Audrey Thomas, and I'm going to be moderating today's conversation. Thrilled to be here with some amazing members from our Asian TP board, who I will introduce here in just a moment. For those who may not be familiar with AAPI Heritage Month, I want to give just a quick overview before we start. It takes place every May and is a time to celebrate the contributions and achievements of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the United States. It's a month-long observation. It was established in 1978 to commemorate the arrival of the first Japanese immigrants to the United States on May 7th in 1843. And since then, the month has expanded to honor the diverse cultures and histories of all AAPI communities across the country. So this month is obviously important for several reasons. First and foremost, it's an opportunity to recognize and honor the invaluable contributions that Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders have made to American history, culture, and society. But it's also a chance for us to raise awareness about the challenges and the barriers that the AAPI communities face, such as discrimination, inequality, and underrepresentation. So throughout this month, you've already seen some stuff we're doing. We're going to be doing a lot more, exploring just a really wide range of topics related to AAPI Heritage Month, hosting several podcasts just like this one, fundraising for APNAGAR, which is a great human rights organization who's working to end gender violence, and a whole bunch more. So let's jump right into it and introduce the guests that I have with me today. And I'm just going to kind of do a roundtable and let you guys give a quick intro. So Amit, we'll start with you.
Oh, certainly. Thank you. Put me on the spot first. Absolutely. Happy to. Hey, I'm Amit Shankadas, Executive Vice President of Marketing at Teleperformance. Basically, I'm responsible for field marketing in the US market. I've been in the US 30 plus years now, so it's been a while. Originally from India, I've had the fortune of living in a few other countries. I was born in Kenya, actually, and found my way eventually to the US, and I call Southern California my home now. With that, Brenda, fellow Californian, we'll move up north.
I like it. Hi, everyone. I'm Brenda Lee. I'm the Vice President, Global Strategic Partner Executive, and love being part of the TP family and this Asian at TP community. Been with TP for 4 years now. I am actually born and raised native Californian, so, in the US. And so all of our journeys are a little different. And so glad that we could come together to share that with all of you here today. Over to you.
Oh, thanks, Brenda. Well, hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Yoon Choi. I'm a Senior Director for Global Trust and Safety. I'm currently leading the program management piece. And I am based in Albuquerque, New Mexico right now, but I'm originally from Seoul, South Korea. I came here exactly 20 years ago. Actually, last month, I celebrated my 20 years in the US. So I'm very excited to be here today and share my story and also listen to all you guys' story here. So yeah, and over to you, Brandy.
Yeah, sure. So Brandy Presti, Executive Vice President of Business Development for the Technology Vertical. And I'm sure people are wondering, hey, wait, hang on a second, she's not Asian. So to introduce myself, by way of why it's so important to me, my husband is Filipino. My kids, both 5 and 7 years old, are biracial. And so I have a little bit of a different take on what it means to, I joke that I'm Asian by proxy, right? So I have such a love for the AAPI culture and have had a different experience being born and raised in the United States, in the Midwest, and then moving to New York City and working for a company that took me all over the world before landing back in the US and living in the South, which has its own culture, right, that defines it. And so it has brought to light a lot of AAPI issues that I'm super passionate about, and I'm happy to be here to talk to you all about it today.
All right, and thank you all for your introduction. So we'll jump right into our first topic of discussion, which I think Brenda and Brandy hit on really well, that all of these experiences are going to be so different. So it's really cool, awesome to hear from just different perspectives on everything we're going to talk about today. So my first question, and I'm going to start with you on this one. I want to hear a little bit about everybody's examples on how you've overcame any cultural nuances that you faced while working here in the United States.
Yeah, amazing question. And thank you for that, Audrey. So, well, actually, I was born in South Korea, and then I was raised there for almost 20 years. And I came here to start my college education. Like I said, that's about 20 years ago. And definitely, it was a total change for me, even culturally, environmentally. Everybody in the US, again, speaking different languages, there are different types of people, not just US folks, but also I was meeting some other people from another countries as well in my through my university educations as well. So definitely it was a big cultural change to me. And just I think what I did basically was trying to put myself out there, and I just focus on educating myself. I thought that it's a challenge, but at the same time, this is something new that I did not know before. So I just tried to put myself out there, interact with all other people in my class, or even getting a job, like a part-time job at a different places to interact with the different types of people, so I can learn their culture, how people interact with each other, just learning or educating myself from a different types of experience that I was going through. And also, I mean, after the college, I started working right away in the US. I went through financial companies. I was working in a different consulting company for a few years. So that also gave me an exposure to interact with the different types of professionals, different types of people in academics as well. So, which is just giving me a lot of different diverse opportunity to learn from other people. I think that was the kind of key thing, how I kind of learn about this US culture and how people kind of communicate to each other. So that was kind of one thing that I focused on. I hope that kind of answers your question.
It definitely does. So I love that you say you educate yourself as far as like doing different things,
Yeah.
because I feel like that's one of the best ways. Even born and raised in the U.S., I learn stuff, especially with all the DE&I stuff that we do, that all the time, that's different
Yeah.
from culture to culture, and it's still just going out there, putting yourself in the midst of it, and trying to learn about it. So, Brenda, I'm interested to know, since you are born and raised U.S., how is that different for you? Working in the United States, but still being a part of that community. Do you see those same nuances?
So I wouldn't say it's the same. And again, I think that what's awesome about Asian TP and this ERG is it brings all of us from different backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, as well as just our history. So my path has been a bit different. My parents both came from China and immigrated here. And then I was born and raised in Northern California. And but I went to school at UC Berkeley, and it's a pretty diverse environment. If anything, part of my journey has been not being Asian enough in some cases, because, like, for various reasons, back in the day when I was growing up and where I grew up, we didn't have ESL or any of that support. And so my parents made the conscious decision that they would only speak English with me. So I didn't grow up actually speaking Cantonese, except for food and for swear words. So I always knew when they were yelling at me, and I knew how to order what I wanted to eat. But so that's part of my story, as well as I think just some of the expectations that, just sometimes that people will have from just their stereotypes, and, maybe lack of awareness. But I found, I mean, I'm decent at math, but I'm not a math whiz. But there was always this expectation that I should be the one who is doing all of the calculations for everything. So there are those assumptions that, through some of some of the steps in my career that I experienced. But what I would say is, just being Asian isn't what defines me. There's so many different aspects that impact how people interact with us. So, in fact, one of the other ways that I feel really marks my career journey is as a woman. And in some cases, like it was just assumed I would be the one who would be the secretary for the team. Those are moments where you realize, hey, they're perceiving some things about me and then interacting with me because of that. I found what has been the key is, and I've had to learn over time, is not to immediately react and then to try to understand where they're coming from and then communicate to and hopefully educate. I think educating those around us is so critical and one of the greatest things I think about these ERGs. Hope that answers your question, Audrey.
I just like that we all keep coming back to education because it's like the biggest part of all of our DE&I stuff, I feel like, is it's not new, but it's still relatively new with how big it's become in our organization, that education's still a huge piece of it.
Yeah,
I'm
it's the
also glad that you
awareness.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I'm also glad that you brought up math because born and raised in the US, me and Amit have been in the US for roughly the same amount of time. So I'm gonna go to him and let him tell his experience and see what he's got to say.
No, you're exactly right about the education piece. And I'll say two things. One, there's also, I think it's incumbent on us to listen and hear and try to understand and then be understood. And I'll give you an example. I'll give you two examples actually of this. So Brenda, totally understand your point about the misconception. I remember my first MBA class, it was a finance presentation. We were making a presentation. We were a group of folks and a fairly diverse group. And I was relegated the role as would be expected for numbers. Numbers were okay, but a gentleman said, I'm going to make the presentation. Right? He said, I can make the presentation. My English is good. I know the subject, etc. I'm born and brought up speaking English. I speak a little slightly different English. We'll talk about that in a minute. But it was rather interesting because what we got slammed on was our presentation, not the facts. Dial yourself forward, same group. Next one, I said, I'll make the presentation. And not to toot my own horn, but I present fairly well. But it's that misconception, right? And it took me a little while to understand where the gentleman was coming from. I was young. I was being exposed to this for the first time, but I learned that, and I'll tell you another story and I'll connect them. This one is a silly one, but I went to school in Louisiana. In Louisiana, everybody's really friendly. I'm a 24-year-old, first time in the US, and all these pretty young ladies running around campus. So every time they'd see me, they'd wave, they'd say, hi, what's up? Oh my God, this is great. I love this place. They all like me, realizing that it's a friendly gesture. They're just people being really friendly. And it took me a while to understand, and I connect these two to kind of correlate. I had to understand where people are coming from, whether it's any culture, right? Where people are coming from, what do they mean? What's their intent? And when we take that step back and try and think about it, when somebody asks what might seem to be a disparaging question, maybe they're coming from a place of lack of understanding. So they're not being mean necessarily. They just don't know. They don't have the context. So education to me is definitely one part of it. I think the other part that I've used as I've traversed my career in the US is take a step back to understand what are people asking, what are they saying, what's their intent. Use of language and vernacular is a little different. But once you get that, then you can help people, help them, and quite honestly, help yourself. Because at the end of the day, it's about helping ourselves and our families and our friends. So that is kind of that second part of the equation, or first part of the equation before we educate is help understand. But I'll tell you, I could go on with stories around 4 powers with language, some of which I cannot repeat in this.
No, I agree with everything you just said. I mean, understanding, education, awareness, everything that we've talked about is critical for a lot of the work that we do within all of our ERGs. So, Brandy, I'm going to come to you now. And I know you talked about, living in the US and then traveling the world. And then your husband is Filipino and is now, I assume, in the US. And you've probably got to see both sides of that. So, what you experienced traveling the world and then what he experiences now working in the US. So, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So it's interesting, right? Because I've listened to everybody's stories and they all have a very similar undertone, which is for me, meet people where they are, right? And so Amit said it and Brenda said it and Yun said it as well. Sometimes you have to let your own guard down to meet people where they are, meaning what they know, right? And you have to understand that everyone comes with a different background. And so my story is a little bit unique, right? So my husband is Filipino, but born and raised in New York. And when you ask him where he's from, he's a proud New Yorker. And like Brenda, he grew up not learning Tagalog because his mother said, we are American. And it's really important for us to be American first. And that was in a time where you didn't celebrate that you were Asian, right? You wanted to assimilate. And so, and it's funny because my husband is now a stay-at-home dad, which is like crazy down in the South. Like stay-at-home dad, who does that? Because that's a completely different thing, right? So he's Asian, he's a stay-at-home dad. And for me, I would say I try to drive awareness, especially with my kids. So this really changed for me and sort of AAPI awareness and the celebration of the history became important when I had children because I took my daughter to the doctor 3 days after I had her, and they looked at me and they said, "Is she yours?" Um, Understanding the state of mind after you have a baby, she's very dark skinned, I'm very light skinned. And I broke down in tears. And it was at that moment that I realized, okay, she didn't know. And I needed to meet her where she was because she was just going with a basic observation. But it's been since that point, and this happens to me all the time now, where I proudly say she's mine. And I proudly celebrate the fact that my kids are biracial and that my husband is Filipino. And our TP Philippines team jokes that Brandy is Filipino. What do you mean? You can't tell, right? Because I celebrate those differences by talking very openly about the culture and what my family experiences. Does my husband experience prejudice, particularly living in the South? Absolutely, right? But people ask us a lot of questions, and back to what Yoon said, it's all about education. And I can tell you, everybody in my neighborhood in North Carolina loves lumpia because food is love. And what I've learned about Asian culture is that Asians love food and you speak through food. And so I've connected to my in-laws and all of my family that's in the Philippines and here through learning their culture and through meeting them where they are. Because 15 years ago, when I came into the family, I was someone who didn't have those kinds of experiences. But taking the time to learn someone else's culture, whether you're at work or in your personal life, to take an interest in it, a real interest, makes all the difference, right? So you put yourself in their shoes and you say, I'm willing to learn and I'm here with you. And so those have been some of my experiences. I'm sharing it more from a personal perspective. I take that with me into my work travels and what I've learned culturally. And I always try to keep my eyes wide open. Am I perfect? No. Do I understand that people might look at me differently? Like I might have advantages because I am not a minority per se. I'm a woman, and that's for another podcast, right? But yes, meet people where they are, take an interest, and it makes all the difference.
Hey, Brandy, if you want to send us lumpia anytime, we'll
Oh, do
take it
you love it?
happily.
Oh, that's great. I'm
Absolutely.
gonna remember that. I'm
Food,
making a
food, you're totally right. Food is a commonality. It's like love. Food and
it is.
love transcend boundaries.
It is. And you'll be so surprised. My sister-in-law and I didn't have the best relationship. I hope she doesn't watch this podcast. But now that I took an interest in her cooking and in learning her culture, took 15 years, but we finally have a great relationship. And it was just stepping outside of my own comfort zone to really understand something else, someone else's life, walk a moment in their shoes, you know.
And I think one thing that's so important about what you just said is you do it, especially since your children have been born. I've changed, I think we all do. When children come along, it changes who you are completely as a person. But they watch you as they grow up be the kind of person who meets people where they are. And that's something that you're going to teach them at a very young age, and it's going to stick with them. So I think that's super important. So I know all of us now have talked a little bit about things that we've overcome, what, some of the boundaries have been. So I want to kind of flip it and go more back to the positive side and talk about some of our success mantras. So if you have any that are, very particular that you love, I want to hear some of those. So, Brenda, we'll start with you this time.
Persevere. That's the one that I've had for, I won't say how many, but for years now, that when times get tough, regardless of what the challenge is or who's confronting you or what the situation is, it's always been just persevere. So that's my main one. If I can, I have a second one. Okay. My second one is be true, whether it's to your teams, right, as a leader, to your customers, I'm in client services, or, and most importantly, be true to you, be true to yourself, and that will take you far. Those are mine.
Both very, very good ones. I love both of those. Amit, what about you?
A single word probably would that encapsulates this for me is empathy. And there's a deep meaning to it because at the core of it, and we just said, food and love transcend all boundaries. And having a sense of empathy means that you're taking some time to understand a person. Back to my original point about listening and hearing and understanding. And the second one really would be, and it's funny, Brandy kind of said this, and put yourself in the shoes off, right? That's kind of another very big one for me. And my team will know, I always say, think like a customer. Everything you create, everything you do, everything you say, think like a customer. It's not about us, it's about who our customer is, whether it's buyers of our services, whether it's employees that we're attracting to work for the company. Think like a customer, put yourself in the shoes off. I think those would be, well, one's a word, one's a phrase. So there you have it. But I'm a marketing guy. I like long sentences, right?
I have that problem too. So, Brandy, what are your success mantras?
The first one would be bold. I mean, I'm in sales, right? Like that's who I am at my core. Be bold. If you have an idea, speak up. Don't be afraid. The worst thing somebody can say is no. And then you can just come back and ask again, right? So be bold. And I guess the second one is a little bit longer, but it always stuck with me. Someone once said to me, if you surround yourself with people who look like you, think like you, and act like you, you're going to get one result. If you surround yourself with people who don't look like you, don't act like you, and don't think like you, you're going to get a million ideas. So for me, that's what I guide myself and my teams by. And I always drive my team to surround themselves with ideas and always have as many ideas as possible from all different types of people. You can't be the only person that comes to the table. So those would be my two.
I don't know about you guys that are in the other ERG groups, but I feel like Brandy might have just coined a new phrase for DE&I.
Oh.
All right, and Yoon, we're gonna finish up with yours. What are your success mantras?
I actually had a few things, but the first thing that came up to my mind right now is being open-minded. This is something I kind of kept it in myself since the day where I started my new life here in the US. I mean, back in the day, like 20 years ago, I mean, Korea was kind of new to all the folks in the US. I mean, these days, the K-pop is popular. Korean foods are very popular. Some movies are already out there that people are very familiar with. So now I feel like people know more about Korea here in the US or even other countries as well. But back in the day, when I went to the college in Minnesota, and people were kind of looking at me like, oh, you're just Chinese or, Japanese or, oh, Korean. Okay, where is that? Like I had a lot of people who didn't know about Korea at all. So that's where I also had some little challenges and difficulty as well, but I kept myself to be open-minded. Like I don't know all different types of culture. Again, I'm very new to US as well, but at the same time, they don't know about the culture that I'm from either. So I just try to be open-minded, trying to accept the different kind of perspectives that people might have. So just, trying to kind of, learn from others, like I mentioned earlier from the first question, and then just kind of embracing all the different cultural differences that I was running into during the last years here in the US. And that's something I'm also still keeping in my mind as we're right now. So yeah, that would be the one that I would like to say.
Audrey, I'm
I
going to
love it.
throw this back to you before you wrap up. You lead and help a lot of these ERGs and have had a tremendous path yourself. What are your keys to?
You had
What
to
are
put
your
me on the spot
words?
because I did it to you earlier.
Absolutely.
I mean, if I had to put one word, and it's not even being cheesy, it is actually one of our values. Integrity is huge to me because I feel like that's a big part of what I've learned in DE&I is part of having integrity is being able to say, I don't have all the answers. I was wrong in this situation. I have more to learn. So that's really important to me and just making sure that we do the right things when we're supposed to. And then one of my favorite phrases, leadership wise, is the only way to fail is to give up. I think as long as you're absolutely, doing your best, you're trying your hardest, you're putting your heart into it, then you haven't really failed yet. You might not always succeed the way you wanted to, but you haven't failed.
Fantastic. I knew there were words of wisdom there.
Once in a while, something comes out. All right. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up for today. I want to thank each of you all for coming and doing the podcast with us. It's always fun when I get to hang out with this group or any of our other ERGs. I'll be good as long as nobody ever asks me who's the most fun to record, because then I'll be in trouble. But it's always a good time, and I appreciate all of you all.
Thank you, Audrey.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Audrey.
everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks for
everyone.
listening.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.